provide you with a PowerPoint presentation, but I certainly don't want this to be stuffy at all. I want you to be able to ask questions, and I want to be able to share what you want to hear. So shall I do the slides, or should we just chit and chat? Half and half? Okay. So first of all, let me tell you who I am. My name is Colleen Dunn. I work at Stanford. I've been at Stanford for the last 34 years. I know I look much younger. So I'm a respiratory therapist, and I started out at Stanford working in the adult ICUs. And then I moved to the pediatric ICUs. Because you were born. And I loved you then, and I love you even more now. So then when Packard opened, I decided to make the change to go work at Packard. And I worked in the pulmonary lab, and my job title was research assistant. And I was like, really? I'm going to do research in the pulmonary lab? And I didn't really know what that meant, but I was looking for a change. So I worked in the pulmonary lab, and that's when I met CF patients for the first time ever in my whole life. And I had worked in Detroit before coming here to California. So I didn't know anything about CF, and I was terrified. You terrified me. I didn't know what to expect, and it took me a hot second to really fall in love with this population and have no intention of ever leaving. So about in 2000, I wanted to do something different. And Dr. Moss asked me to join the team. And my role initially was just to provide pulmonary function and expertise with all the respiratory therapy that was done in studies. And our first study was gene therapy all those years ago. So we've come a long way, baby. So a couple years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I became the research manager, and that doesn't mean that I don't still see patients, because that's really where my heart is, and everybody knows they want to keep me happy. So with that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about research participation. And the boring thing is, what is a research study? And according to the FDA, it says scientific investigation of a potential treatment in a particular group in order to learn if the treatment will be of value in a larger, more general population. And I just need y'all to know that that research starts really early in companies, in laboratories, and sometimes in petri dishes. So it doesn't come to you fresh out of the bag. And I can't see that. There we go. So there are two types of research studies. An interventional trial, which are the ones like the Vertex studies, where we're giving you something and we're trying to figure out what's going on when we give it to you. And then an observational study, where we've done tons and tons of observational studies, where when you're in the clinic, we might say, can we have extra sputum today? Just to take that back and look at it in the lab. But we're not doing anything to any patients. We're just looking at your sputum or your blood.
And how beautiful.
And we learn more and more how beautiful Devin is on a daily basis. So there's 4 phases of research, and the first phase is really generally done in about 20 to 50 patients, or healthy normals, I should say. And it's really just trying to understand, is the treatment that we're proposing to do in patients or bigger populations of patients, is it safe? What's interesting right now in research is some of the studies that we're doing at Stanford, and I'm sure UCSF as well, is looking at CF patients. The first in human is in a disease state. So that's when they're saying, we're not going to see any effect if you study this drug in healthy normals, because they don't have the defect. So we're doing that now. And for me, that's the really exciting stuff. I love to do that. That's when the visits are very one-on-one. They're very long. We get to spend a lot of time with the patients. There's, several interventions. For example, lots of PKs. We put in a little catheter and draw PKs every half an hour. But I love that. Pharmacokinetics, to see when you ingest the drug, what is your body doing with it? So they take these little samples frequently, maybe every 30 minutes, and then the studies that we're doing now are PKs out to 12 hours. So I'm with you for like 14 hours a day. And it's fun. That's what I like. In phase 2, this is generally speaking in most studies when you are looking at the patients. No more healthy normals. You're with the patients. And you want to make sure that this is going to be healthy and safe for patients, looking for an optimal dose. What's the best dose to give somebody? Not too little, not too much. And just beginning to see, is there any efficacy? Great that you give somebody a drug and it's safe, but does it do anything? That's what you really want to know. No reason to take drugs that don't help. That's just another pill or an inhaler, and God knows you don't want to do too many of those. The next phase is phase 3, and that's when you've got a lot of patients. This is when, generally speaking, when you get a drug approved, you need to do 2 phase 3 studies. And in CF, that's like 600 patients. And you give it in a more broad population. The FEV1 criteria is a little bit more broad, and the studies are longer. And this helps the FDA determine if the study is going to be safe and effective and in a large group of patients. And then phase 4 is something we really don't do very much of at Stanford. It's called post-marketing, where the drug is already approved and they want to see in the general population, given everybody's other, like hypothyroidism or arthritis, or like if you have other disease states, what happens when you take it with all the other drugs? So for us, it's just not something that we spend a lot of time doing. We have a lot of expertise in early phase research at Stanford. So I want you all to know that there's a lot of safety oversight, and we're going to go through each of these little bubbles, but you as a participant are protected on many, many levels, and you need to know about that before you embark on a study. So first of all, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they want to make sure that the studies that are being conducted, the studies that sponsors come to them and say, we're going to start this study, that they believe that there's merit to it and that there'll be safety mechanisms in place to protect you. They can come to a research site at any time. They can come for cause. Somebody calls and says, oh, Colleen Dunn's bad to Devon. They can come and investigate that. They can come just because a drug is being approved and they want to take a sample of maybe 4 or 5 sites and go and look at the data and make sure that the data is what it says it is, make sure that it is realistic data. There have been studies that have been done in the recent past where people were made up. And there was no real people in the study, so it just helped get a drug along the pipeline. So the FDA is very concerned about this. And we, as a study organization, are very willing to have the FDA come out because we know that the work that we do is very good. We don't think that there's holes in our research, but if there are, then we're willing to see those holes and fix it. So we're not FDA adverse in any way, shape, or form. There's also institutional review boards. Stanford has their own. This is a group of people that made up of physicians and lay people and other experts to review every single study. They review it in the beginning, they review it annually, and they look at the study when there's concerning data. They can say yes to the study. The FDA can say, yep, we're good with it, but your institutional review board could say no. If they have concerns about patient safety, they're really looking out for the people that will be partaking in research at that center. And they also can audit. We get a lot of audits from the IRBs because we do a lot of pediatric studies, and they want to make sure that we're consenting those children properly, making sure that there's no coercion. You know, if a kid says no, the kid said no, even if the mom said yes. I mean, we will not put a child in a study when the child's saying, no, 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 and the mom's saying, yes, yes, yes. I mean, we can't do that. That's not okay. That doesn't set you up for a healthy experiment in the end. There's also the principal investigator, the PI. That's the physician that's running the study. And he or she signs an agreement with the FDA to run the study in compliance with the regulations. And there's lots of regulations for good reasons. Lots of people think that the FDA is too full of red tape. I personally am really pleased with that. I want to make sure that patients are safe. I mean, you're giving us an opportunity to interact with you and to use you more or less in a safe way to make sure that we can know if drugs are safe. Let's see. The principal investigator will delegate roles. For example, I'm delegated roles of doing spirometry, maybe sputum induction, running study visits, doing EKGs. Somebody else on our team might just be delegated to run the samples and ship the samples. So you need to be of proper training and education to do the role that you're delegated. But in the end, the principal investigator takes full responsibility for the study. I always say that they're going to jail, not me. It's true, but in recent past, there have been research coordinators that have also been held to a very high standard. I don't think they've gone to jail, but they have been fined, and they don't work in research anymore. Getting scary? Sometimes it is. All right, the research coordinators, that would be us. And I always say that when you are a first-time research participant, you will become my new best friend. And that, excuse me, that is because we're going to work very closely together. You get my cell phone, and I want you to call me anytime. If you got a problem, we need to know about it. What would be horrible is if you got sick and you were sitting at home, really sick, and not calling anyone, and then we found out like a week later that you were admitted. That's not good. So we need to know that you're okay at all times. And it's, one of the things that we can do for you is get an appointment with one of the docs. If you're not feeling well, call me. I'll call somebody. I'll get you in. You'll be within a day, hopefully within a few hours, you'll be being seen. We need to really track all of your medicine, all of your symptoms, because we're giving you a medication. And we need to know, is it related to the medication? Let's see. Also, there's study monitors. So we have people, representatives from the company, come out about every 6 weeks, and they look at all the study data, and they question the investigator and the study coordinators to make sure that we're running the study in accord with the protocol. There's also something called a Data Safety Monitoring Committee, and in CF we have our own, the CF Data Safety Monitoring Committee, which is a DSMB, which is so much easier to say. They're looking at data as the study progresses, and usually they have planned meetings. They get data that is de-identified, so they'll know the placebo people and the people on drug, and they look for safety signals. And in my career, we've had twice where the DSMB has said, this is not good. Once it was not good. The other time it was, this is really good, we're stopping the study, which is pretty cool. That was Kaleido. So the one study that they stopped was it was an anti-inflammatory study. Which one? I remember. You remember? So there were a cohort of children in the study, and that the DSMB saw that the children were developing pulmonary exacerbations. The adults seemed to be fine. We had a lot of little kids in the study, and they seemed to be fine. We didn't notice that, but I think that was my cell phone. I apologize. Pardon me.
Or are you leading a charge again?
Excuse me?
Sounds like you're leading a charge.
That was a message failed, sent to Devin. My phone wasn't working here. It was so funny. I apologize. That never happens, but I was lost. So anyway, making those phone calls to patients when a study is being stopped for safety concerns is huge. And it was me. I was pretty new. And calling all these people saying, Dr. Moss and I have discussed this, and for safety concerns, which I didn't know what they were at the time, just please stop your study drug, and we will be in touch in the next few hours to give you more information. And the parents were just like, are you kidding me? What's wrong? I don't know. There was a safety concern. We know that your children are fine. We've seen you all within the last week. So know that there's lots of bodies making sure that you're all right. So I just really briefly, why in the heck would we do research? And I think it's often very important to keep this in mind. We're trying to answer a research question. Some bloody brilliant person has come up with a research question, and we want to know if we can answer it. We want to discover new therapies. Oh my gosh, all the modulator therapies that are out there. This is a really cool time. Gene therapy, good things are happening out there. But we must know if the new drugs and therapies are safe and effective. That's the most important thing. What we don't want to do is put a drug out into the community and then have adverse events happen. bad adverse events. We never really know, but we want to go out there with a pretty assured that things are going to be okay. Obviously, we want to get new drugs approved. That's very important. And then we want to make sure that it works in CF patients particularly. That's the research that we're doing. And we can't do the research that we do, UCSF or Stanford or Hopkins or any of those places, without CF patients. We just can't do it. So when you get phone calls, just have an open mind. Hear us out. Some of us are make a more compelling argument, push a little harder. All right, let's talk a little bit about who can be a research participant. So my colleague Zoe Davey was like, put this bullet point first, that we must follow the study protocol. And I think the reason that we want to say that is because oftentimes I don't think that patients understand that it isn't us just saying you have to be there 8 times and you have to be there on day 1, day 7, and day 14. It's because the protocol was written that way in a very particular manner for safety. And so I can't just change it. You know, if you wake up on Monday morning and say, I'm not flying in from Seattle today, that's really a bummer. That you can't do that unless you're not well. We need a little leeway, and we need to be able to then go back to the sponsor. Would it be okay? This person's not feeling well. Could we bring them in tomorrow? So I don't have any control over that. To be a study participant, you must be able to meet all of the inclusion criteria. These are things like your FEV1 needs to be between 40 and 80. If you're not, I can't put you in a study. I can't massage that. I can't look at data from 3 years ago and say, there's a 79. I can't do that. I really can't do that. And then you can't have any exclusionary criteria. You can't have, say, frank diabetes in some studies. I can't make that go away. It's in your chart, right? So those are things to keep in mind. Maybe you're not being called for a study and you don't understand why. You call me and you ask me, because I'll tell you why. I know why you're not being in a study. And remember, at Stanford alone, there are 500 CF patients. Usually studies, we maybe get 2 or 3 slots per study. So sometimes more, sometimes less. You've got to come to the study visits when we tell you. You've got to come. We sometimes have windows, and we will work with you, but not always. And you should know that up front. Like, it's a discussion. It isn't, you want to do a study? Great, let's start tomorrow. It isn't like that. We really need to talk about it. You have to do the study procedures. Let's say you just hate sputum induction. This is not a good study for you. If every visit you have to do sputum inductions. Or maybe spirometry is not your gig. You hate it. And they're going to do it like 4 times every study visit. Probably won't work. You've got to be honest about medications and changes in your symptoms. If you eat pot brownies, I need to know that. No, seriously, I need to know that. And no judgment, but I just need to know so that when your drug screen comes back, then I'm not surprised. And then it's like, did you eat something? Right? We're best friends. Please don't smoke it, okay? I mean, I'm not advocating all of this, but if you do it, just be honest. We're best friends, right? We need to know. And then you really need to make a commitment to the whole study, not just the first 2 weeks. And one of the things in research that's really hard for sponsors, for research centers, are that people stop doing the study. They just kind of get bored and they don't want to come back. But that's really hard because you can't all of a sudden just enroll 20 more patients because 20 people got bored. So you need to make a commitment long term. At Stanford, we've been doing the EPIC study for 15 years. That's a really long time. And even the patients now are like, really, 15 years? I've been coming here 15 years? You have. And it's finally ending, which is crazy. It is an EPIC study. It's living forever. All right, so how can you get involved? This is the fun part. You can ask your clinical team, wherever you are. And if we have people calling in from other places, we're very connected. If you want to be in a study, you call your study team and they say, we're not doing that study. Likely they can help you find another center. We're very collegial. We don't steal patients. We're happy to have you come to Stanford and then go back. It's totally fine. Ask your CF doctor. If you don't have a huge research program, they are supposed to connect you. It's a CF initiative. We're supposed to help patients reach clinical sites. That's our job. We're supposed to help anyone that wants to do research, blaze your trail, find your study. That's our job. Ask CF team members. We have somebody, a research team member in every clinic. Ask them about research. That's what they're there for. Give them a question. They're bored too. CFF has done a great job with the clinical trial finder. I highly recommend you do that. Just check it out. You can put your age, your FEV1, and what you're looking for, be it anti-inflammatories, maybe supplements, any of those things, and it'll pop up a study and give you all the sites that are enrolling. That's an option. Or just call me. I'm always at my desk. I'd love to chat. Okay, so just as I switch gears a little bit, I want to share with you some of the studies that were conducted by Zoe, my colleague, that we did a survey to assess research satisfaction at Stanford. Now that's a mouthful. But we started it in 2010, repeated it in 2011, and then I resurrected it in 2017. And the reason we do that is to really get our pulse on our community. We really want to know what patients want, if we're meeting your needs, and if we're not meeting your needs, how can we do it better? So in each year, we ask the same questions. We wanted to know, we asked people that did research and a group that didn't do research. I mean, in every center, there are those two groups. For those patients that did participate, and these are the take-homes, I think, for people that might be on the bubble with, do I want to participate or don't I? 96% of the patients that have participated in research felt very safe during their experience with our team. And 89 of those patients felt very satisfied, which is huge. If you're safe and satisfied, we know we're doing something right. And really exciting for us is those patients, 98% of those patients would do research with us again. And that really tells me that we do it right. We really make patients feel safe and they feel like they're contributing and we're part of that team. We're part of your team. Then we really want to look at the number one reasons for not participating. And they all said, hands down, we were never asked. And so I want you to beckon back to my earlier thoughts about inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria and being able to meet all of the circumstances that go on with each and every study. You know, maybe it was 20 visits over 30 years, and you just couldn't fathom that when you were starting college. Maybe you had a bad bug. That's very real these days. If you have a bad bug, many protocols exclude patients from protocols. So when we look at that, why weren't patients asked? The number one thing that we want to parrot back is, were you eligible? We don't know. We ask ourselves, are we really missing this huge group of patients that want to do research that don't know about it? And so we've started a lot of initiatives at Stanford to really try to reach everyone, just to touch our pulse on them. How are you doing with research? Have you ever thought about it? Can we provide you education on it? And one of the reasons that we have Daniel Alvarez in our clinics is because we knew there was a need for Daniel to be in all of the clinics at Stanford and all of our affiliate sites. So this guy was hired to go to Emeryville, Madera, and CPMC in the city. And who knows where else he'll go in the future. But that was an untapped study population that we really wanted to bring in-house. And then we know we need to educate everyone, not just our frequent flyers, as we like to call them, but everyone needs to be educated. People are being diagnosed with CF later in life. And we want to make sure that they are tapped into and have the educational tools that they need. All right, so with that, this is a picture of Devin when I don't know how old you were, but you were in a study at that time, and your mom gave us this picture as part of thanks. So thank you to Devin. Devin is a frequent flyer. He does a lot of research with us. He was actually, when he moved to Seattle, he was in the middle of a study. And he said, well, I'll keep doing it. So that was a simple phone call between the research coordinators and the sponsor of the company. They were lovely. They wanted to keep him in. And so they flew him back and forth for every study visit. And so
I got so many miles.
that was a small perk. So those are things to think about, right? Well, I can't because I live too far. I can't because. Let's not just erase the question altogether. Let's have a dialogue. Let's see if we can make it work for you. Because we are really willing, I don't know if Devin maybe could attest to that, but we're really willing to help people be in research if they want to be in research. So with that, let's just open it up and let's just have a dialogue about it. If I have things I can share if you don't have questions, but I'd love to hear from you.
And just for the people online, if you can repeat the question.
Yes, if you ask me a question, I will repeat it before I answer it. Okay, and then Carol also has a microphone. So any thoughts or questions? Yes? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Just I have a couple questions. A couple of them, but one I'll just start with is like the idea of polypharmacy. Like we are all on a ton of drugs, and then you give someone an experimental drug. How do you know that that's the drug that's helping, and how do you know the interaction with the other drugs? Because as far as I remember, 15 years ago, was not, you didn't really stop any other drugs when you entered a trial, right? So how do you really know the interaction is safe with everything else we're on, and that it's not the other drugs?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I think that that's one of the things that, as researchers today, these companies are very savvy now. The list of exclusionary medications is 3 pages. So that's another thing. You might say you're interested, or we might do a query. The CF Foundation has all these queries built for all these studies. So I'll run a query, I'll pull it out, and then a research coordinator goes through every single eligible patient, including every patient's drugs. So oftentimes that will take you right out. A lot of the seizure medicines cannot be in research. A lot of the mood altering, if you're on Effexor or something, they're not in. Sometimes if your diabetes isn't stable, some of the antibiotics are not part of it. So we're doing that look before we call kind of thing, because the companies know what interacts with their drugs, and they're constantly, doing those studies in their laboratories and saying, oh, now you can be on this drug, but you still can't be on that drug. Right? So safety first. They're going to be very, very stringent when studies first come out. The phase 1s are very stringent, just high FEV1s and not a lot of different medications and not a lot of other healthcare conditions. Does that answer your question? Great. Did you have another one?
I do, but other people can ask them.
Yes, Devin.
So
Hold on.
the question was about, you mentioned like the FDA could approve it. You mentioned the FDA could approve a study, but the IRB might disagree. I was wondering does the IRB talk to the FDA much, or is it just independent?
Yeah, so the FDA is approving clinical trials as companies go to them through their process of getting drug approval. And as the studies come to institutional review boards, the IRBs, the IRB is saying, I don't like that. So I get that answer. Then I have to go back to the study sponsor and say, they don't like that answer. So then there's no direct communication between sponsors and IRBs. I sometimes wish there was, because I don't know what you're asking, right? You need to get your maybe preclinical scientist involved. I don't know the answers.
Does the IRB, if they make this study, people change something, does it have to get approved again by the FDA?
Yeah, so the question was if the IRB makes changes to the study?
Yeah, like says I don't like this, you have to do it.
Yeah, so the IRB cannot change a study protocol, nor can an investigator, nor can a research coordinator. We can't just say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore because we don't like it. You can't do that. So the company would then have to take in-house that recommendation. If it's just going to be one IRB, then we're probably at an impasse and Stanford's not going to get the study. If every single IRB across the nation, or even in Europe or wherever the study's being run, if that's happening in every single study, then they're going to need to take it back, and they're going to need to rework it and go back to the FDA. Yes?
What are the main indices that the drug is working? In that, would you want to see an improvement of lung function, or is it the reduction of the decline? Like, how do you know that it's working when it is?
Right. So every study has primary objectives, secondary objectives, and then exploratory objectives. So every study is going to be a little bit different. There's a big push right now for improved patient outcomes. Like, how do you feel? What do you think? Tell us how you feel, right? Because I don't know. Maybe your FEV1 is up by 5 or 10%, but how do you feel? What's your life like now? Did you feel better, but your treatment burden is so much higher, it's not worth it to you, right? So every single study is just going to be a little bit different. Hi. More questions?
I have a question about, what was it, the data review?
DSMBs.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what they do and how that works?
Yeah.
And like, how are they different from the what was it?
The IRB.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, too many acronyms.
I know, it's terrible. I kind of think it's ridiculous, actually. So the data monitoring boards, the DSMBs, okay, so they're independent, and our own John Mark has been on the CF DSMB for years and years and years. So it's people that have an interest in, they're usually leaders in CF, for our board. I'm just talking about the CF board. And so they can't have any conflict of interest. For example, John Mark couldn't be running a study at Stanford and be on that board. That wouldn't be kosher at all. So what they're designed to do is at predetermined intervals to look at study data. And they have all of the data. Like, we have crunch time where the DSMB is meeting on April 14th, and so all the data needs to be in and clean by the 10th. And they actually go through all of those, primary outcomes just to see, are we on track with that, or are we seeing, for example, like increased pulmonary exacerbations? For example, in Orkambi, there were increased liver enzymes. Was that related? Was that CF? Did patients have pre-existing liver disease, which a lot of patients do? Those are the kind of things that they do. So they have expertise in CF, but they actually look at the protocol, know what the protocol's asking patients, the data that we're gathering from those patients, and trying to understand what is inputting, what's making that signal go high, and is it all right, is it acceptable risk or not? When it becomes unacceptable, they have the right and the power to stop the study. It's kind of interesting. We see, every 6 weeks or every 3 months, whatever the schedule is for the particular study, we get those reports, and you see that they looked at these things, and generally speaking, it's either continue as planned or to move on to the next cohort of patients, which is pretty cool. It makes me feel good to know that somebody's looked at the data, not the sponsor, right? Because, the sponsor's like, oh, this is great. All the data is super. But this is an independent group that they've hired, right? They're part of this protocol. So I think it's a thing that makes me have another layer of comfort with this.
So the IRB is before the study, the data reviews during and after.
Correct. But the IRB is also looking at, for example, when you're in a study and you have a pulmonary exacerbation and you're admitted to the hospital. And when you go into the hospital, if the investigator says, this might be related to the study drug, I don't really know, that data is reported to our IRB within 24 hours. Straight away, I have to say, here's the data, this is what we think, and I have to send it to the IRB, and I have to send it to the sponsor. And the sponsor needs to make sure it gets to the FDA. So that's sort of how it's all working. The DSMB is going to get that data too. If in 4 days, when you're better and we discover you had an appendicitis, and we can attribute those hospitalization symptoms to that, then we can provide them with new data. But the IRB already has the data. The sponsor already has the data. Yes.
Can you talk about how having a transplant impacts all of these potential enrollment in studies?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I don't think I've ever seen a study in CF that accepted transplant patients. So once you're transplanted, then you still have CF, obviously, and I think that that's an important thing to remember. It's not that your CF is gone. You still have cystic fibrosis, but you really have this whole new regimen of drugs, and we want to protect those lungs, and so we're not going to put you in those studies. It's not safe. It isn't safe.
So for each study, there's a required number of participants, right? And do you not start till you have all those? And then what happens if there's not enough? Like, does it get up on hold or just stop, or what happens?
Those are super good questions. So generally speaking, a sponsor will, decide they need, by power calculation statistics, they will figure out how many patients they need. And based on that, they will then pick research sites. And research sites are then usually given X number of slots. And so what a site would do is say, I can only speak for Stanford. What I do is when we're up and ready for a study, I have at least 2 patients, and the other 3 or 4 are in the wings. So I've already picked those people. So when we talk about research, the new studies that are coming up, I've already got people lined up. They're already ready to go. Now, I don't think it happens very often that we just can't enroll a study. So Vertex is a perfect example. They've done taken the approach of having more sites, right? Like bring a lot of sites on, so then that kind of limits how many each particular site can put in. The newest next-gen protocol, I got 2 patients. I had 4 lined up. And I had to call them and tell them that they couldn't be in the study. So it's a very double-edged sword. I mean, I know you guys don't believe this, but I actually can come to tears over it. I called Vertex and said, you call them. It's not fair. Like, these are people that I have a relationship with. Oh, we know. But it's hard. It's very, very hard. So I don't think there has been a study in the recent past that hasn't gone far beyond the expectations of enrollment. Fast.
I was just thinking because there's a lot of exclusions.
Right.
So, potentially there's too many with meds and, lung function numbers and bacteria and all that.
Yeah, so I think that sponsors that are participating in CF research at the moment, they know what they can do. They have access to the registry data, the cystic fibrosis registry data. They know how many, I just sat with a Vertex representative the other day, and she was like, how many patients do you have with Delta F508 homozygous, greater than 18, less than 18? How many of those have residual function? Greater than 18, less than 18. How many of those have minimum function? I was like, back off, Jack. It's very fluid. I just thought, wow. Those are great things for Vertex to have for planning purposes, but I was really surprised. And then, they want to know how busy we are. Very busy. I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to answer that. So, yes.
I'm curious about international studies and how they translate here or don't translate. And can you speak a little bit about
I can. I think so right now I'm in a program, a master's program for regulatory affairs, and I feel like I can really do that with some degree of accuracy just because of what I'm studying. But In CF particularly, the United States tends to get up and running very quickly. So we tend to be able to get our startup activities done, which is get the protocol through the IRB, create a budget, negotiate the budget, and sign a contract. So we tend to be able to do that very quickly. So at Stanford, it takes us on average 3 months from the day that they say, you get the study, to the day that I can enroll a patient, 3 months. So in Europe, they're very frustrated. CF centers in Europe are very, very frustrated because their whole process is much more retracted. And for several years, I went to the European CF meetings and talked with the coordinators and really learned their frustrations. They feel just like I do. They've got all the patients lined up, and they have to call them. So I think right now that sponsors in CF are really thinking about trying to get the European sites up and running faster. So they're delegating a proportion of the patients to the European sites and a portion of the patients to the US sites, which is just much more fair. And it also speaks to the demographics. CF patients in Europe are just different. You know, it's different locations and availability of drugs and all of that stuff. They're different than US, West, or East Coast for that matter.
Also, just to tag on to that, if there's like, say, a different type of study done overseas, like say in Europe, and maybe do they always fall in the same line with what's going on in the US? Or say if there's a different type of study done over there and it shows great results, how does that translate here? Do you have to replicate that whole study, or can you use that data over there? Or like how does that interaction, I guess, work?
Yeah, so in Europe, you need to get approval from the medical authorities, the European medical authorities, and they would need to get that approval from the FDA as well. But they can use the data from the foreign studies as long as the data has been conducted under good clinical practices. So it happens. Right now, I know that in England, they're doing a lot of gene therapy that we're not doing here. We had done that here and didn't have the best of luck. I know Cleveland's running a gene therapy trial right now. So I think that much of the same research is being done, but there are, forgive this word, a silo of gene therapy here and a silo of gene therapy there. But I think it's pretty much the same kind of thing. Different people are looking at different things in laboratories, maybe inflammation, you know, that seems to be a big thing, but pretty much the big companies are really in both areas doing the same kind of things. These are getting harder and harder.
So I had a question regarding exclusion criteria, and if you have a big exclusion criteria and you test the drug on a certain population and it gets approved, and you then have a limited amount of information about how the drug will interact with the people who are excluded. So what do you do to make sure those patients are safe when they start trying out the drug?
That's a great question. So in those circumstances, those phase 4 studies become very important. So you begin to look at patients in the real life setting just to see what the signal you may or may not see. So when you get your drug approved, you're going to have a label, and the label's going to not have those excluded people part of it, right? The FEV1 is between 40 and 80, and don't take itraconazole. You can't be on seizure meds. But in the real world, drugs are tested in all different kinds of ways, right? Doctors say, well, I think this is safe for you. And there's a system called a MedWatch system where when somebody believes that a drug caused a certain particular reaction, you report it. And that report goes to the sponsor, and the sponsor needs to address it. So, you know, as you get more and more information, even when you're in phase 3, you're beginning to open up that criteria, that exclusion criteria more and more. So you're getting some of that safety data on more and more patients.
Just along the same lines, aside from the Vertex drugs that are targeted towards a certain genotype, like how do we know that there aren't differences in responses to drugs based on ethnicity and race, which obviously is a small issue in CF, But like, whenever I take my osteoporosis med, it says like, if you're Asian, then this is the thing. If you're African American, this, like, how do we know our bodies respond differently?
Yeah, because they're so more emerging, but there's so few patients of various ethnicities. So I'm sure that there are sub-studies being done within the larger population. They've got all the data. You can crunch the data for years and years and pull that out. I really don't know at this point, but it would seem to me that you could just pull that data out of the cohort of phase 3 data or whatever.
Because when, in Japan, they wouldn't approve Pulmozyme because they said, well, the Japanese people might respond differently. But then the company didn't want to pay for such a tiny study because there were so few patients.
Yeah.
And so then they're stuck without the drug. So there's this sort of catch-22 of the circumstance there. It's
Yeah,
just an
for sure.
example.
Yeah, that's a very interesting example. I can't really speak to it because I don't really know. More questions? Yep.
So if there was back to the question about transplant.
Yes.
If there was a transplant drug, is that something you would never really deal with because it's not CF specific? Like a lung transplant clinical trial, would that be the adult transplant clinic that would do that trial?
So I don't know if Stanford is doing clinical trials in lung transplant. I don't know. That would be a specific team. Dr. Conrad is running the pediatric transplant program, and she's doing her own studies. There is such a thing, as funny as it sounds, as like rent a research coordinator for a study, and we have that at Stanford. There's no app yet. Stay tuned. So they just have people that come in to help out on various studies, and so that's what Dr. Conrad is doing because we're just stretched too thin to be able to do that. So, yeah.
So my question is about the different phases of trials, and I remember learning phase 1 and phase 2 have higher rates of failure than phase 3. Can you talk a bit about why that is?
Yeah, I
What
think,
might cause that?
yeah, so, we have to do the studies. Oh, sorry, I'm repeating the question. So Devin made this very important point that there is a rather high percentage of studies that never get past phase 2. They just fall apart. And the question was really, well, how does that happen? And I think it's that whole idea of, is a drug safe, is one question. The second question is it effective? Does it do anything? And I think that's where you see that kind of fall apart, is they're not able to demonstrate that. And there's really, there's no value added to a company to pursue something like that when they haven't seen that change. I think the Inspire study that we did, maybe some of you remember that study, was inhaled drug 3 times a day. And in phase 2, there was a signal. And it was sort of, the company kind of sat on the fence. Well, should we or shouldn't we? The signal, like it was showing some promise. So, when you start up a study, I can't remember who asked the question, like, what's the best, what are you looking at, FEV1 or, quality of life? So they chose FEV1 for their signal. They went to phase 3, and they didn't see a change in FEV1. Though they did see a change in inflammatory markers, but that wasn't their primary outcome. So they went to phase 3. They ran 2 phase 3 studies, but the study, it didn't show anything because they picked the wrong thing, right? It's kind of a crapshoot. You got to pick something, and the company went under because they really couldn't see what they needed to see. And I can't even think of the millions of dollars off the top of my head that are spent and just go nowhere in research at phase 2.
But they do eliminate things.
They do.
So
They do.
value in that as well.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of patients weren't all that disappointed with that Inspire fail, because who wants to do 3 treatments a day on top of everything else you're doing? So for us, we were like, already the research coordinators are like, you can't do that to people. You can't. They're not going to do it because we knew that compliance was going to be an issue. And we did have a large number of children say, I'm not doing this anymore, Mommy. So that's huge.
So I came in a little late, so maybe I missed something. But are there any specific studies going on right now that are exciting to you?
Yeah, I think I'm totally jazzed about everything that's going on. I think that there's a lot of fancy things that are out there right now, and I think that the studies that are looking for help for patients that are not Delta F508 homozygous or R117H, I think that to me is super exciting. I know that the foundation is totally into finding the cure for every single mutation. That's super cool. There's lots of cool things coming down the pipeline, and I think that I think we'll see it, and I think it's not that far off. I really do.
Colleen, from your personal experience, how many drugs make it through the whole gauntlet and are promising? Like what percentage do you think, if you'd estimate?
I think it's like 72% fail. I think I'm in that ballpark between 68 and 72. Yeah. You just don't know. And that's, I think, when the gene was discovered, I remember being like, oh my God, that's so exciting. Everybody was. It wasn't just research coordinators, right? But just the incredible amount of work that it takes to get to a phase 3 study and then to wait with bated breath to see if it's going to get approved. That's, Vertex has been great. They've done so well. I don't know if you heard Orkambi's just approved for a year and up. That's crazy. And we're doing those studies in those babies, and they're going to be able to get commercial drug. You have a baby born today, your baby, there are studies right now, but your baby could be on drug very shortly after life. And if that isn't the most cool and exciting thing, it's mind-boggling to me. We didn't have that for all you guys. That just wasn't there. So, we're still going to have to do studies. It's just not going to wipe it all out, right? There's still CF lung disease. There's still GI issues, still diabetes. So, yep, Devin.
How do you do studies on babies? It sounds hard. I remember being a kid and
Yeah.
It's atrocious.
So doing baby studies, that was the question. How do you do a study on a baby? It's really kind of hard. I think we were in a...
have to do with diapers and
Well, of course, you have to do everything. You have to feed them and burp them and change diapers, and babies don't understand. And what was that?
They can't tell you yes or no.
Yeah. Well, so the study that we're doing right now is 6 months and up. So you can just imagine a 6-month-old. And I can never stress this enough when I talk to research coordinators that are new or thinking about this as a career. When you do research, you don't do research on one person. You do research on their community. And especially with a little baby, for example, a mother's need to feed a child is so strong. And sometimes CF babies are really hard to feed. And so moms come to us in research with a lot of stuff. They're scared, right? Their baby's not gaining weight. It's got lung disease. What are we going to do, right? So, really part of the study visit is really just dealing with day-to-day, how do you do baby life, and then we're going to give you a drug on top of it. So I think for me, it's a little frustrating because the kids don't know. And, you guys had sweat tests when you were babies. Some of you have done sweat tests as adults. That is not all that comfortable. So when you're doing it on a baby, you have to just, distraction. So one little kid was totally into balloons. So every study visit, we bought balloons, and we just, look at this one and look at that one. Another one loved bubbles, so we did bubbles. So you need to be creative and reward good behavior and always have a treat at the end of the day and never be the bad guy. Like, I'm not drawing the blood on the little kids. I just can't do it. I want them to love me. So it's a challenge. And I think that, when you have, we have a family from Utah doing study with us right now, and they're just delightful. But we didn't know them, and they didn't know us. And to try to build that trust amongst the mom, the dad, the child, and the extended family has been really, really rewarding. And I don't know if they'll ever do research in Utah. They kind of like us, and we love them. I mean, we really feel connected. We know all the grandparents, and it's really fun. It's really, really fun. So a challenge, but really a great experience as far as I'm concerned. Yes?
It sounds like most of your work is like drugs. So what if there's a new procedure for sinus surgery or procedure for embolization? Like, who does that study? Who researches like a technique or something like that, if not the CF Center?
Yeah, so the question was, who's doing the research on procedures, whether it be an embolization or, what was your other? Sinus,
type
so.
or whatever, I'm just giving examples.
Yeah, so that would probably
It's not a
be,
pill or
right.
inhaler.
So our team is designated to therapy, whatever that therapy is, whether it be medications or devices, that kind of thing. I think that you would see that research being done by the surgeon, by the interventionalist. That's where you're going to see those people interacting to get that work done.
Collaborate with them?
We're not collaborating with them at the moment, no, because really it's not just CF embolization, it's embolization at large. And putting me in embolization as a research coordinator would be a very big mistake because my expertise is really so not there. Our team of research people at Stanford are highly specialized healthcare providers. I'm a respiratory therapist. We have another respiratory therapist and 2 nurse practitioners. So we have a lot of experience where we can do everything. We don't even need to have any of the research staff help us do it, which really then makes study visits easier flowing. I don't have to spin blood. God help us if I spun blood. I did it once and it went spinning, literally, all over the room because I didn't know how to do it. I just wanted to do it to help because we needed help. So that's not a good place for Colleen Dunn to be in the lab. Not at all. So use the expertise that you have, I think, is so very, very important. Yes?
My other question is like sponsors. Of course, I'm slightly cynical here, but it seems like there's a lot of companies that are trying to get rich, right? So what if there was something like hypertonic saline that's pennies, and we want to know whether it works or not? Would you actually do a study on that if there's no real sponsor, no real revenue generating, or CPT, or, that's just an example, or anti-inflammatory diet, or those kind of things that we don't know if they work? But obviously you have competition for your time for other big pharma, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think that our research program may be unique in that we have Dr. Mila, who he's a lab rat. Essentially, he's a lab rat. So a lot of the research that we're doing is just investigator initiated, where he's proposed a question. For example, he's growing ciliated cells in the laboratory. And he has all these cool ideas. I did a couple of device studies. We've done studies looking at chest PT versus something else. So I think that programs that have investigators that want to do things on their own, right now we're looking at Pseudomonas and phage, and what can we do to alleviate that, and does phage really make people sicker? So we like to do that. We're also part of the network, which I kind of took out of the slides because I had that in my first presentation at CFRI. So the network is 87 sites strong. Yeah, 87 sites. The network, the Cystic Fibrosis Therapeutics Development Network. So it started out with 8 centers and has grown over the years to 87. And the idea behind that was to offer research to every single patient, because patients felt like they couldn't do research because they weren't close to a center. So they opened up all these research centers to be able to do that. And as a network, we're charged with doing some of those low-hanging fruit things. They're not fancy, they're not exciting, but they compensate some of our time for them. Yeah, so for example, one of the studies that's coming out right now, which I think is super exciting, is looking at azithromycin. You know, we all, right, 3 times a week. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it help? Doesn't it help? I think that's super exciting. Initially, I was like, I'm never going to get anybody enrolled in that study, but now I'm super jazzed about it. I think I can, because it's a question that needs to be answered. So that's what our network does. Another study that they want to look at is, we did this with Kaleido, where before patients started Kaleido, we brought them in and started doing various tests on them. We did sputum inductions, we did spirometry, we did blood, just to see all these different markers over time. These patients have been in the study for 10 years. It's a wealth of information. What's changing? Long term, you know, there's just this vast amount of information. That's really cool. And they're planning to do the same thing with the next gen protocols. Just the network is interested in things. What does it look like today, and what's it going to look like in 10 years? What are we going to see in biomarkers? What are we going to see in sputum? I mean, that's cool stuff. So I think that there are people out there that are doing some of the low-hanging fruit that is interesting.
So speaking of that sort of thing, with regards to money, is your budget from Stanford, or is it from all the medical companies? How does the money work?
Yeah, so the question is, how does the money work in a research program? So every program is different. We're super lucky. We have a lot of support. We have a lot of grants, and many of our people are in grants. The CF Foundation several years ago developed, it was called an ARC Award, which meant it really stands for Additional Research Coordinator. And what that did is they set out 87 sites, but there was nobody to do the work. So they gave programs money, 100% money for the first year, 75, 50, 25, so that over time, as you became more proficient, you would be able to maintain that individual in your program. So we have some hospital support, and we have some grant support for Stanford people. So we're really, really fortunate.
So for the basic research, is it mostly NIH funded, or are there companies that put all the warrants?
Yeah, so our foundation uses NIH and CFF money as our network. That's how the money comes through to us. Yeah. I actually personally feel that we get a kind of a bare bones budget, and I'm the budget person as well. And, you know, I'm not into making money. That's not my idea. I just take what we can get. And, you know, I think if you worked with me, we would probably have no money because I just want to do the work. It's okay. I'm more interested in making sure that the patients are compensated and that the patients can travel if they want to travel. That's the most important thing to me. And just a word about compensation. So most studies will provide compensation for time for patients. And we understand that you are taking time out of your busy days to be part of these research programs. What we're not paying you to do is to go get a manicure or watch a TV and, you know, a movie in your room that evening. So those are just things to help patients get to sites if you have an interest. We want to make sure that you can do that. And we want to make sure that you're well cared for. So we want to not put you in East Palo Alto if you're going to stay in a hotel. We're going to make sure that you're close to the hospital so that you can come see us at 7 a.m. So all of our patients are compensated. We have a standard operating procedure that's used across the network for providing compensation to patients. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how you calculate how much per hour or whatever? Like if it's a really gruesome
Oh, sure.
task, you give them more.
Yeah, so as I said, there's a standard operating procedure within our network, and for every hour of time spent at the site, you're compensated $30 up to $280, I think, for a long 12-hour day, which is then at the discretion of the research coordinator and the investigator. If you're going to be having a bronch, say, or something that's invasive, then I would increase that money. I never have really been questioned by the IRB, because that's the ethics board. They want to make sure that we're not coercing you. I haven't ever been accused of that. The studies, the Vertex studies that were done in the little kids, they were being compensated as the adults were being compensated. And it was actually money.
Money for the parents.
So, yeah, you really have to try to delineate, talking to parents, saying, you can't give your child $400 at the end of this study. I mean, should you have, do you want us to give you the ATM card, or do you want your kid to have it? But to kind of think about that, right? Because some parents did some kids took the money and went to Disneyland, and what a great thing. And they took their siblings, which is cool. I love that. But it's just something to consider, because it's a lot of money. Not to say that they don't deserve it, because I mean, it's not fun for little kids to be stuck in a room with me. Even though I'm fun, it's not that fun. So, other questions? So let me ask you, do any of you know about our website at Stanford or our Facebook page? Any of you familiar with that?
I think I follow the Facebook page.
Okay.
I've been to the website twice.
Okay, so I would ask all of you to maybe just look and tell us what you want. This is the thing that an initiative with the research coordinators in June was to really ask patients what they wanted from our Facebook page and from our website. What is it that you want? Do you want information about clinical trials? What are we running? It's really hard to keep up. It changes. It could change daily. Do you want information about, I don't know. I'm just curious. What would you guys like to see on a clinic's website or Facebook page? Is there something that